Well, folks, Democrats are on the run, and we're going to get to just why in a moment. First, the Daily Wire continues our fight. As you know, on this show, we've been calling for the pardon of Derek Chauvin. Derek Chauvin was railroaded. The medical evidence demonstrates that he did not, in fact, murder George Floyd, that George Floyd had significant pre-existing conditions, that he was high as a kite. The tape itself does not show everything that the media made it out to show. The case, when it was actually conducted in court, was a political sacrifice to appease the mob. That's what it was. The jurors themselves acknowledged they'd been put under severe pressure. President Trump should pardon Derek Chauvin. That would, in fact, by the way, reduce his possible sentence because the federal statute requires a certain level of sentence. His state conviction would remain, but it doesn't have the same sort of mandatory sentencing. We're leading the charge on this one. Go to pardonderek.com right now. Sign the petition. This is the kind of stuff that we do over at Daily Wire. We need your help on this one. Pardonderek.com. Alrighty, so Democrats are having a really big problem. They are deeply unpopular. And so while they roam the landscape, suggesting that President Trump is falling apart, that the Trump administration is wildly unpopular, that is not what the polls are showing. The polls continue to show that Democrats and the Democratic Party writ large are in serious political straits. Harry Ensign yesterday on CNN explained that there is a real reason why Democrats are currently riding at 20% in the approval ratings.
There's a reason why congressional Democrats have like a 20% approval rating, and even amongst their own party has like a 40%, the lowest Quinnipiac has ever measured. And I think last night and sort of what's been going on over the past few months is a gosh darn good illustration of that.
Agreed.
I mean, even Democrats at this point in the mainstream media are recognizing this simple fact. And yet Democrats continue to do performatively stupid things. I don't know who they think they're appealing to, but there is a serious collective action problem inside the Democratic Party. None of the Democrats wants to appoint sort of a Democrat leader to rally behind. That's one problem. The other problem is they all want to be that leader, and so they have their own form of stupid protest. And then finally, they're afraid of being left behind in the Great Awakening. They're afraid of being seen as insufficiently far left and nutty. And so now it's just all signaling all the way down. Yesterday, Al Green, not the famous sort of R&B singer who created Baby Boom, not that guy. The other Al Green, the 77-year-old guy waving a cane with a bad haircut at President Trump. Well, he was censured by the House because obviously if you get kicked out of a State of the Union address by the Sergeant at Arms, you're going to receive a censure vote. In fact, several Democrats voted in favor of the censure. This censure vote ended with Democrats singing, "We shall overcome," as though something had happened to Martin Luther King Jr. in Selma when Al Green was removed for yelling nonsensical crap about Medicaid.
The House has resolved that Representative Al Green be censured, that Representative Al Green forthwith present himself in the well of the House of Representatives for the pronouncement of censure, and that Representative Al Green be censured with public reading of this resolution by the Speaker.
Deeply inspiring. I mean, first of all, is anybody, not tone deaf in the Democratic caucus? But beyond that, this is what you got? Really? Well, that's not all they got. The House Democrats have also released a brand new viral video. It is a take on Street Fighter, in which a bunch of Democratic Congress people, as well as a social media influencer by the name of Solhi Jessica Wu. I will admit I did not know who Miss Wu was until this video dropped. And all I can say is woohoo. In any case, they basically drop into frame, and by drop, they pretend they're dropping into frame like a Street Fighter character, and then bounce around, and there's a description of them as though they're a character, and it said, choose your fighter. The House Democrats released this video, and let me tell you, President Trump must be just running scared at this point. So she's bouncing around this Solhi Jessica Wu. And then AOC, it says New York's 14th Congressional District, and then Representative Lauren Underwood, and Representative Catherine Clark, who looks as though she was performing, some sort of bizarre act. And then I don't even know what to say. Choose your fighter. We need a cutaway there of Rob Schneider from A Hot Chick knocking one of these women through a wall with a pillow. That's choose your fighter. Some of these women are like 60 years old and bouncing around like they're 17. Like, this is what you got. This is the thing that you have. This is not going to do it, gang. The Democrats are in disarray. The best they have is the continuing sort of woke vibes. Tara Setmayer, Democrat in the mainstream media was on the Dean Obadiah show. And if you've never heard of that show, you're not unique. The first you're ever hearing of it is here on this show. So congrats to Dean on finally having a listenership. And Tara Setmayer stopped by to explain that censuring Al Green for screaming nonsensically during the State of the Union gave her slave ick vibes.
And when he was removed by the sergeant at arms, which I found to be very alarming, it bothered me. I didn't like to see a black congressman being talked down to by a Southern Speaker of the House telling him, to sit down. It gave me very slave master ick vibes. But to have the sergeant at arms come and remove a member of Congress from a joint session.
Yes, it was just like slavery, wherein he was at no point a slave, and in which he implied that he was going to lead an impeachment effort against the current sitting president of the United States, just as a slave would. Oh my goodness, these folks. Well, some Democrats may be starting to wake up. Anybody who has an IQ above room temperature. One of those people, believe it or not, is Gavin Newsom. So Gavin Newsom, he is slick. He has no principles. The governor of California. I have some personal experiences with Governor Gavin Newsom. In fact, the first time I spoke with Governor Gavin Newsom was all the way back in, I believe, 2013. And Governor Newsom was then not governor. He was running for governor. And he was on a Los Angeles morning show that I was doing at the time. And I asked Governor Newsom at the time about the idiotic idea of building a bullet train extending from Los Angeles to San Francisco that would stop in Fresno. And they were talking about how it would cost billions of dollars. And I said to him, well, don't we have cars and planes in this state? Don't we have an I-5 that goes directly up the state? I've driven it many times. Why precisely would we need to spend billions of dollars on a bullet train? And he said, at that time, that it was a terrible, stupid idea. He then proceeded to be elected governor and spent billions of dollars on a stupid, terrible idea that never materialized in any way, shape, or form. So let's just say that whenever he declares that he's had a change of heart, I treat that about the same way I would treat his prior relationship with Kimberly Guilfoyle, with a large grain of salt. In any case, Gavin Newsom has started a new podcast, and I will admit that I'm eager to listen to every episode if it's as good as this. So Charlie Kirk, our friend from TPUSA, was on with Gavin Newsom. And Charlie asked Gavin Newsom, why is your party so addicted to the idea that boys should play in girls' sports? And Gavin Newsom, the reason I'm bringing this up is not just strip on Gavin Newsom, which is fun. I mean, let's be real. But the reason I'm bringing it up is because Gavin Newsom is doing the intelligent thing. He says, hey, maybe boys shouldn't play in girls' sports. And, acceptance is the first step toward actually fixing the problem, Democrats. And here is Gavin Newsom leading the way.
Would you do something like that? Would you say no men in female sports?
Well, I think it's an issue of fairness. I completely agree with you on that. So that's easy to call out, the unfairness of that. There's also a humility and a grace, that these poor people are more likely to commit suicide, have anxiety and depression. And the way that people talk down to vulnerable communities is an issue that I have a hard time with.
Wow. Wow, wow, wow. So that is Gavin Newsom giving up the ghost on this issue, which is, of course, the thing that Democrats must do. As I've been speaking about for years at this point, the thing that makes Democrats seem totally nuts the most is this particular issue. But Democrats are having a hard time on this one because just a few days ago, the entire House Democratic caucus voted in favor of the idea that men need to play in women's sports if they identify as women. The entire Senate Democrat caucus voted the same exact way and ended up defeating a bill that would have enshrined rights for women in sports. Hakeem Jeffries, the House Minority Leader, was asked about Gavin Newsom's comments, and here's what he had to say.
I haven't seen his comments. What Democrats opposed was unleashing sexual predators on girls throughout the United States of America.
The hell? The what in the what? So the way you oppose sexual predators being unleashed on girls is forcing grown-ass men with their dingleberries hanging out to shower with the ladies in the women's room before a swim meet. That's the way you prevent sexual predation, according to Hakeem Jeffries. Again, at some point, the reality is going to set in for Democrats. That's what's going to happen. The reality is going to set in for them. Either it will because they decide to wise up or because the voters keep clocking them over and over and over. And so much of this, again, is being driven by the media's bizarre fixation on the idea that this is some sort of civil rights issue. So, for example, Politico has a piece titled Newsom's Move on Trans Athletes Jolts 2028 Campaign. Gavin Newsom's provocative new position on trans athletes on Thursday reopened a rift in the Democratic Party that could serve as one of the earliest flashpoints in the party's 2028 primary. Is it a provocative new position? Or is it the position of literally all of humanity for all of human history until the last 7 minutes when the entire media and Democratic Party decided that boys who cut off their junk were girls? Within hours of the California governor condemning trans athletes playing in female sports, shocking his party in his home state, some Democrats unloaded on the likely presidential contender. It's disgusting, said Lori Lightfoot, the former Chicago mayor, with an approval rating so low that she ended up being ousted as the mayor after one term. There are kids waking up in California with this news thinking their governor hates them, and rightly so, said Pramila Jayapal. She urged Democrats to, quote, not take the bait and give in to their anti-trans people rhetoric. But to moderates, Newsom was offering a lifeline for a party plagued by culture wars and the polarizing politics of trans women in sports. His comments were the latest from a field of potential contenders seeking to distance themselves from identity politics in 2024. Again, sort of fascinating to see some Democrats beginning to wake up to the political realities of the dumbass positions they've been holding on this one. And they're going to need to come to terms with some other political realities, like, for example, the fact that Americans are very much in favor of closing the borders. It turns out that Americans don't like open borders very much. And some Democrats, say John Fetterman, have been coming to grips with this. The reality is that in order for Democrats to win the presidency, they have to run as left to moderate Republicans. They must. Joe Biden ran as a left to moderate Republican in the 2020 election. Barack Obama in 2008, before his reelect, in 2008, Barack Obama ran as a person who wanted to bring common sense to government and unify the country after a divisive era. Bill Clinton, by today's standards, would have been judged a left to moderate Republican. That's just the reality. And so Democrats are going to have to start to recognize they've ceded the middle ground to Republicans over and over and over again. And if they want to keep doing that, listen, I'm perfectly fine for them doing it. But at a certain point, reality is going to have to set in. Listen, reality needs to set in. We live in a world where narratives often matter more than reality, but here's the thing, the data don't lie. If you want the data, you need usafacts.org. USA Facts isn't about the narratives, it's about data. Real, nonpartisan, verifiable data straight from government sources. Whether it's taxes, healthcare, or the economy, USA Facts gives you the numbers you need to cut through the nonsense and make informed decisions. And they make it super easy. Go to usafacts.org, sign up for their free weekly email that you can rely on to get the data behind the news. It's like a personal briefing on the state of the nation, delivered directly to your inbox. No spin, no bias, just facts. Like if you care about how our government is, for example, spending money and where your taxpayer dollars are actually going, this is for you. A lot of folks are interested in what DOGE is doing. If you want the background, go to usafacts.org right now. Get clear, contextualized facts on the issues that matter. It's time to know those facts because the data don't lie. And you can always have your own narrative, but the data are the data. You want to know the data so that you understand what the hell's going on in the world. That's usafacts.org. Go check it out today. Again, usafacts.org. All the rest is spin, but the facts are the facts. usafacts.org to get just the data. Also, starting a business is really exciting, but the financial cost that comes with all of that, not quite as exciting. When I launched the Daily Wire, we became very familiar with compiling a sea of receipts, trying to track employee expenses, spending countless hours reconciling statements. It was a nightmare until we got it all figured out. But it doesn't have to be that way. You need Ramp. Ramp is a free corporate card. It handles all your tedious financial operations, like manually logging receipts and chasing approvals. Ramp does all that automatically, so your team can focus on the stuff that truly moves the needle. Forecasting, planning, scaling your business. If you're in an industry the way I am, time to execute breaking news coverage right when it happens. And here's the reality. Most finance teams, they spend 80% of their time on mind-numbing busy work, chasing down expenses, only 20% on what actually matters, strategic planning and growth. Ramp flips that equation completely. Over 25,000 businesses trust Ramp, including Shopify and the Boys and Girls Club of America. That's why they were just named #1 in spend management by G2. And right now, for a limited time, listeners of the show can get $250 when you join Ramp. Just go to ramp.com/Shapiro. That's ramp.com/Shapiro. ramp.com/Shapiro. Cards issued by Sutton Bank, member FDIC. Terms and conditions apply. Now, meanwhile, on the right side of the aisle, one of the big problems for the right side of the aisle is, yes, you want to move fast. You have power now. You got to move fast. You got to break things. You got to do them. At the same time, you have to balance that with the reality that Americans actually don't like radical change very much. You have to somehow achieve the signal ability to craft radical change without undermining your own agenda. And so far, the Trump administration has been doing a good job on this. So, for example, despite all of the media freaking out over DOGE, the Department of Governmental Efficiency, and Elon Musk, it turns out the poll numbers remain pretty strong on this. Here's Harry Enton explaining this.
Americans on Trump and Joe's efforts, Musk and DOGE should influence government spending and operations. Look at this. 54%. The majority say that he and they should How about approve of Trump trying to cut staff at government agencies? Again, you get a majority here, 51%. So yeah, Elon Musk might not be that popular, but these cuts and the idea of spending cuts, at least within the federal government and cutting at government agencies, that actually has majority support.
Okay, so herein lies the rub. If you look at that poll, it says Musk should have, quote, at least some influence on government operations. In other words, people don't want him to go in there with a chainsaw the way many people on my side of the aisle would love for him to do. They want him to go in with a scalpel. And President Trump recognizes political reality. Again, I've said this about President Trump before. This is a man who lives in the world of political reality in a way that most politicians do not. Most politicians are so ideologically attached to their positions that even if those positions start to go wrong with the American people, they hold by them. And there's something to be recommended about that because at least you know the differentiation between the parties. I mean, I'm clearly an ideological person. I have a set of beliefs that fit into a broader worldview. And I think that that's helpful to my listeners because they know where I'm coming from. But for President Trump to be successful, he has to continue to be as pragmatic as he has been. So yesterday, he made clear that he would be. Yesterday, according to Politico, President Trump convened his cabinet in person to deliver a message. You are in charge of your departments, not Elon Musk. According to 2 administration officials, President Trump told top members of his administration that Musk was empowered to make recommendations to the departments, but not to issue unilateral decisions on staffing and policy. Musk was in the room. The meeting followed a series of mass firings and threats to government workers from the billionaire Tesla founder who helms the Department of Governmental Efficiency. President Trump then stressed that he wants to actually keep good people in government and not to eject capable workers en masse. Here's President Trump saying just that yesterday.
I want the cabinet members to keep good people. I don't want to see a big cut where a lot of good people are cut. I want the cabinet members to keep the good people, and the people that aren't doing a good job, that are unreliable, don't show up to work, etc., those people can be cut. So I had a meeting and I said, I want the cabinet members, go first, keep all the people you want, everybody that you need.
I mean, again, this is President Trump saying, let's use a scalpel, not a chainsaw. And then he put out a statement to that exact same effect. Quote, the golden age of America has just begun. Over the past 6 weeks, our administration has delivered on promises like no administration before it, always putting America first. DOGE has been an incredible success, and now that we have my cabinet in place, I've instructed the secretaries and leadership to work with DOGE on cost-cutting measures and staffing. As the secretaries learn about and understand the people working for the various departments, they can be very precise as to who will remain and who will go. We say the scalpel rather than the hatchet. The combination of them, Elon, DOGE, and other great people will be able to do things at a historic level. We just had a meeting with most of the secretaries, Elon and others, and it was a very positive one. It's very important that we cut levels down to where they should be, but it's also important to keep the best and most productive people. We're going to have these meetings every 2 weeks until that aspect of this very necessary job is done. The relationships between everybody in the room are extraordinary. They all want to get to the exact same place, which is simply to make America great again. So again, that is President Trump reading the tea leaves. He understands that many people are going to start targeting these sort of broad level cuts without specificity and pointing to victim stories. And of course, there will be victim stories because when you move fast and break things the way that you would at a tech company, then there are a bunch of people who lose their jobs who are sympathetic. There are going to be some things that get broken that actually might not need to get broken. And so Trump's saying, listen, at the very beginning, we go super hard, but now it's time to actually make sure that we don't break anything that we need and that the departments actually go through and take the recommendations under consideration and then with a scalpel, not with a baseball bat, go through their departments. That is a smart move by President Trump. A lot of people are painting this as a sort of flip by President Trump. It is not. It is what President Trump always does. He course corrects to the most successful position. That is the thing that he is attempting to do right now. Okay, meanwhile, the same, I believe, is holding true with regard to tariffs. So yesterday, amid all of the hubbub about President Trump's new tariff regime, President Trump reversed some of these tariffs. According to NBC News, President Trump issued exemptions on tariffs for a variety of goods coming into the United States from Mexico and Canada just 2 days after he put the sweeping tariffs in place, leaving investors and businesses grappling with the whiplash of his back-and-forth trade policy. Those exemptions to the 25% tariffs enacted on Tuesday would apply to about half of goods coming into the United States from Mexico and about 38% of goods from Canada that comply with the North American trade deal reached during Trump's first term, according to a senior administration official. So again, this is being portrayed as a flip-flop, and in a certain way, it is. But it is also a recognition of reality, which is when the market takes a giant dump, at a certain point, you're going to look at that and go, hey, maybe we shouldn't do as much of this as we've been talking about. When the poll numbers start to go the wrong way, maybe that requires a course correction. A brand new poll from the economist YouGov on the tariffs explains that a majority of Americans believe that the cost of tariffs on foreign products imported into the United States would fall mostly on companies and people in the United States. Now, whether that is true or not, that perception is really bad for President Trump. If the prices rise and all of that is blamed on the tariffs, the American people are not going to be happy. And trying to whistle past the graveyard on that was a mistake that Joe Biden made, right? You remember the transitory inflation that was not transitory at all? Or the implication that your life was better than you thought it was? People don't like being told that when the prices are going up, actually everything is hunky-dory. So again, it is not about whether, in fact, China feels it more than we do. China will feel it more than we do, but what do we care? If you're an American citizen, what you care about is how America is feeling it, unless you actually believe that like Canada and Mexico are enemies. Why do we care if a tariff is affecting Canada and Mexico more than it is affecting us? It's not a comparative thing. Most things affect foreign countries more than they affect the United States. We are uniquely strong. We are uniquely well positioned in the world. We have a uniquely strong economy and constitution. But if things are worse for Americans on an absolute level, not a relative level with regard to other countries, on an absolute level, Americans feel it. This is why, for example, President Trump yesterday announced the reversal of the Mexico tariffs. He put out a statement on Truth Social. He said, quote, after speaking with President Claudia Sheinbaum of Mexico, I've agreed that Mexico will not be required to pay tariffs on anything that falls under the USMCA agreement. This agreement is until April 2nd. I did this as an accommodation out of respect for President Sheinbaum. Our relationship has been a very good one. We are working hard together on the border, both in terms of stopping illegal aliens from entering the United States and likewise stopping fentanyl. Thank you to President Sheinbaum for your hardworking cooperation. So again, if the idea here, as I've said before, if tariffs are for leverage, if tariffs are a ratchet, then great. You got something you want from Mexico? You don't have to tariff the products. That's good. If, however, there is a principled attachment to tariffs, as though tariffs are going to make America economically stronger just on their own, that is not a saleable position for the vast majority of Americans. When it comes to the economy, there's just reality. There are just facts. That's also true when it comes to nutrition. A lot of people worry about their kids' nutrition. I certainly do. You know, most children's vitamins out there are basically candy with a vitamin label. They're loaded with 2 teaspoons of sugar, artificial ingredients that kids really do not need. Well, this is where Hiya comes in. They've created an amazing chewable vitamin that kids actually love. The best part? 0 sugar, still totally delicious. What impressed me was learning about their ingredient list. They've packed in 12 organic fruits and veggies plus 15 essential vitamins and minerals. And they've thought of everything. It's non-GMO, vegan, allergen-free, thoroughly tested for safety. That means you and I can both feel confident giving our kids vitamins made to this high-quality standard. Are you tired of battling with your kids to eat their greens? Hiya now has Kids Daily Greens plus Superfoods, a chocolate-flavored greens powder designed specifically for kids, packed with more than 55 whole food ingredients to support brain power, development, and digestion. You just scoop, shake, and sip with milk or any non-dairy beverage for a delicious, nutritious boost your kids will actually like. They even send stickers with your first order so your kids can decorate the bottle and make it their own. We've worked out a special deal with Hiya for their best-selling children's vitamin. Receive 50% off your first order. To claim the deal, head on over to hiyahealth.com/Shapiro. Again, that's HIYAHEALTH.com/Shapiro. Get your kids the full body nourishment they deserve to grow into healthy adults. Also, did you know that Andrea Bocelli, Steph Curry, Justin Bieber, Tim Tebow almost didn't exist? All their moms were encouraged to end their pregnancies. When a woman faces an unplanned pregnancy, she's often pressured by somebody else to terminate. She wants to make the right choice, but society tells her, well, the baby isn't really alive. It's not a big deal. This is where Preborn steps in. Preborn and their network of clinics offer compassionate care to moms, providing the support they need to choose life, including a free ultrasound. It's amazing, but when a mom hears her child's heartbeat, she becomes twice as likely to continue the pregnancy. If you believe in protecting life, it is time to join with Preborn. Together, we can empower women to make life-affirming choices. When we support moms and motherhood, we transform families and futures. Just $28 provides 1 ultrasound. $140 helps rescue 5 babies. Monthly donors receive stories and photos of the lives they've helped save. Dial pound 250, say baby. That's pound 250, baby. Or visit preborn.com/Ben to make a difference today. Again, that's pound 250, say keyword baby. So Scott Bessent, who's an excellent Treasury Secretary, he really knows what he's doing, but he's being put out there to defend tariff policy. He's at the Economic Club of New York, and he was talking about what he thinks the American dream is. And he dropped this line.
Access to cheap goods is not the essence of the American dream. The American dream is rooted in the concept that any citizen can achieve prosperity, upward mobility, and economic security. For too long, the designers of multilateral trade deals have lost sight of this. International economic relations that do not work for the American people must be re-examined.
Okay, now, again, if these trade deals are actually hurting the American people, and there are some that are, then we should re-examine them. However, part of the American dream and part of upward mobility is being able to afford things, obviously. Making the argument to Americans that access to cheap goods is not part of the American dream, tell that to people who have to pay more for their mortgage. That is a good. Tell that to people who have to pay more for services. Those are all goods and services that you have to pay for. Actually, access to affordable things is, in fact, part of the American dream because upward mobility relies on you being able to afford things. That is a reality. And so, again, I think President Trump is going to look at the markets. I think that, once again, he looks at the results of his policies, and if they are not achieving what he wants them to achieve, he changes the policy. Speaking of which, Vladimir Zelensky has changed his tune entirely in Ukraine. He is now not saying any longer that the war is going to last a very, very long time. He was saying that just a few days ago. Now he is saying that they are seeking a swift end to the war. He says there were some special issues concerning our national resilience on the staff meeting agenda today. We are working on all possible scenarios to protect Ukraine. The baseline scenario is to hold positions and create conditions for proper diplomacy. For the soonest possible end to this war with a decent peace. Again, Zelensky is where the United States wants him. Now the United States needs to get Putin to the table. That's the next step. We have massaged the Russians enough. Now it's time for us to exert enough pressure to get Putin to actually come to the table, make some concessions, and get to the end of the war. It takes two. It takes two to tango with regard to that war. Now, speaking, by the way, of corruption, I know a lot of people connect this war to corruption. You want to hear about actual corruption? This is my favorite corruption story of the day because it is quite wonderful. So apparently, Hunter Biden is no longer able to do his art. I know you're shocked. You thought that Hunter Biden was a great artist, capable of selling his paintings for $500,000 a pop. However, according to Politico Playbook, a pardon from his dad spared Hunter Biden from prison, but the former president's son remains saddled with debt and was forced out of a home he was renting by the recent Pacific Palisades fire, according to Politico's Josh Gerstein. Biden detailed his grim financial situation in a court filing yesterday, saying he has struggled to sell his paintings in recent months, moving only one in the past 14 months, compared with 27 in the prior 2 or 3 years. He reported significant debts and lackluster sales of his memoir, just more than 4,200 copies during a 1-year period that led up to the trial in Delaware last spring, in which he was found guilty of lying about his drug addiction on a federal gun purchase form. Well, I wonder what happened. Why did the market drop for his paintings? I mean, that's weird. So for like 2 or 3 years, his paintings were selling like hotcakes because everyone wanted a Hunter Biden painting. And then no one would buy his paintings. What could have changed? It's a mystery wrapped in enigma. Or maybe people realized that his father was not going to be president for much longer, and then if you bought a Hunter Biden painting, you were flushing your money down the toilet. Whereas before, if the idea was that he was actually the president of the United States and you bought a Hunter Biden painting, guess who got access to daddy? But don't worry, it was never corrupt. This family is as clean as the driven snow. I can't imagine why the Biden administration was widely derided and hated by the vast majority of the American public. It is a gigantic, unsolvable mystery. Meanwhile, it's time to initiate a brand new segment here on the Ben Shapiro Show. We call it The Takedown. Here is the deal. The left loves to put out monologues, speeches, grandstanding diatribes, completely unchallenged, but not here. In Takedown, we're going head-to-head, breaking apart their arguments piece by piece, exposing the contradictions, the logical fallacies, and the actual lies. It's time for The Takedown. Today, we are going to go through the response of the venerable intellect Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to President Trump's State of the Union address the other night. And it was amazing. She was knitting a sweater while she did it. And so, her brain was apparently largely taken up by that absolutely difficult task. Here is some of what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had to say about the President of the United States address to a joint session of Congress.
I didn't feel like I could legitimize his presence. And so Trump actually has to be formally invited to the House floor in order to be allowed into the House floor. Same thing with all those senators and the cabinet members, etc. So, I think other people had a certain logic, which is that this is the people's house, and Trump showing up should not kind of force the duly elected representatives of that chamber, especially those who disagree with him, out.
Okay, so I assume here she's talking about Representative Al Green. You will note at this point that President Trump was in fact invited to address Congress. That is how he got there. He was invited by the Speaker of the House to address Congress. And then everybody else was invited. And then you get kicked out if you break the rules. So immediately, she's starting off without any logical foot. And it gets worse from here.
The reason they're shaking all these couch cushions and the reason that they are rattling off all these numbers is because all those numbers they are trying to add up into one of the most massive tax cuts for billionaires and the 1%, probably in modern American history. And do not forget that. Don't forget that. It's not just about what Trump is saying.
According to Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, it was the people at the top of the income tax spectrum who benefited the most from the Trump tax cuts of 2017. It was geared toward millionaires and billionaires. Now, I can tell you that my tax rate actually increased under the Trump tax cuts. However, the question that really should be asked is not whether people at the top saw more of a decrease in their taxes than people at the bottom. Of course they did. People at the top pay way more taxes than people at the bottom on both an absolute and a relative level. The top tax bracket in the United States at the time of the Trump tax cuts was 39%, and it dropped down to 37, 36%. Okay, if you're at the bottom of the tax bracket, you're paying basically no income tax. So it'd be very difficult to actually pass a tax cut that benefited you. Obviously, gains from income tax cuts are going to be disproportionately to the people who pay the taxes. The real question, and the only one that really matters, is after the Trump tax cuts, did the share of total taxes, of like all taxes, paid by the top increase or decrease? So in other words, if $100 in taxes got paid by the American people, what percentage of those taxes were paid by the top 1% in 2016 before the Trump tax cuts? And what percentage were paid in, say, 2020 after the Trump tax cuts? So I asked our friends over at Perplexity that question, quote, what percentage of total income taxes did the top 1% pay in 2016? And what percentage of total income taxes did the top 1% pay in 2020? And here is the answer, quote, in 2016, the top 1% of taxpayers paid 37.3% of total income taxes. In 2020, the top 1% of taxpayers paid nearly 42% of all income taxes. This data shows an increase in the share of income taxes paid by the top 1% between 2016 and 2020, rising from 37.3% to 42%. So all that talk about how the richest in our society were sort of disproportionately benefited by the Trump tax cuts, if that's so, then why did we pay a larger share of the taxes total than we did before the Trump tax cuts? Okay, we continue with AOC here.
Medicaid. Don't you find it interesting that he did not mention Medicaid once? Once? The largest source of health insurance, one of the largest insurers in the United States that impacts most Americans. If he was confident about his attacks on Medicaid, he would have said something, wouldn't he? He's confident about his attacks on immigrants. He's confident about his attacks on federal workers. He's confident about all those things. Why won't he own up and Republicans own up to their attacks on Medicaid?
I love this non-argument by AOC here. This is a tremendous logical fallacy. So she is essentially arguing that absence of evidence is evidence of absence, meaning that there's a complete absence of evidence that President Trump wants to cut Medicaid. He said over and over and over he doesn't want to cut Medicaid. That's why he didn't mention it, because he doesn't want to cut Medicaid. And she is suggesting he didn't mention it because he does want to cut Medicaid. I'd need like some evidence to suggest that he wants to cut Medicaid. Like, where is she getting all of that? And the answer is she's sort of inferring it from the fact that if you are going to do a budgetary bill, as Republicans are proposing in the House, then it needs to be deficit neutral. And that means that there need to be cuts from somewhere. But again, President Trump has already said he doesn't want to cut from Medicaid, which means the cuts are going to have to come from somewhere else, or the bill is going to have to change, obviously. Here's AOC continuing.
Because what they are trying to cut from Medicaid, I'm going to tell you, is somewhere to the tune of $880 billion from Medicaid. Okay? $880 billion. And I sit on the committee that Medicaid goes through. And the math ain't mathin'.
The math ain't mathin'. Wow. She sounds like a great accountant. The math ain't mathin'. Well, I mean, what she's actually referring to is the fact that part of the bill refers to the committee that deals with Medicaid, among other things, to try to identify cuts. But it doesn't say that Medicaid has to be the source of the cuts. So Democrats just keep saying a thing over and over for which, again, there is no evidence. So then she decides that she is going to start talking about the work requirements of Medicaid. Now, one of the things that Democrats don't like to talk about a lot is the fact that there are a lot of people who are on Medicaid because, in fact, they're claiming disability falsely. One of the great multipliers in terms of our welfare dollars is disability. But here was AOC talking about how work requirements were really not in any way being harmed by Medicaid disability.
Work requirements. The amount of people that are actually, if you are, for example, 29 and you're on Medicaid, and you are not working, you are most likely disabled. You most likely have a major disability. These ideas, when they talk about if you do not have a job and you do not have a job for a long period of time, and the percentage of people on Medicaid, it's I don't quote me on it, but I think it's 3 or 4%. Very, very, very small.
Okay, so a few notes here. Once again, I asked my search partner here, Perplexity, what percentage of people on Medicaid are working? Because she says that it's all hardworking people, nobody's jobbing the system or anything like that. The answer, in 2023, approximately 64% of Medicaid adults under the age of 65 were working either full-time or part-time. I'm just going to point out that means 36%, more than 1/3 of the people who are on Medicaid were working not at all. Not at all. Okay, so that is not a very, very minute percentage. That is a lot of people who are, in fact, not working. In fact, 44% of Medicaid enrollees under the age of 65 were employed full-time. 20% were working part-time. Now remember, these are people who are lower than the retirement age. They're lower than the retirement age. It is also worth noting here that an enormous number of people on Medicaid do claim permanent disability, including huge percentages of people claiming disability who are relatively young. Again, according to Perplexity, approximately 21 to 22% of Medicaid enrollees have a disability. That is way higher than it used to be, by the way. The claims of disability in the United States have risen almost exponentially over the course of the last couple of decades. According to Perplexity, adults age 19 to 49, 22% claim a disability on Medicaid. If you're 50 to 64, 43% are claiming a disability. So, I asked my magical friend at Perplexity, what qualifies you for a disability under Medicaid? The answer is that you have to meet these criteria. 1, the disability must prevent the individual from working and be expected to last for at least 12 months or result in death. 2, the condition must be a medically determinable physical or mental impairment that results in anatomical, physiological, or psychological abnormalities, as shown by a medically acceptable clinical and laboratory diagnostic technique. Now, there's only one problem with this. You know how easy it is to find a doctor who will say that because you have high blood pressure, you have a disability, or you have back pain, and that is why you have a disability? And there is not a really fantastic way of checking whether these folks have disability. The instances of disability fraud in the United States are legion. They are radically high. Okay, here is an insane statistic for you. I asked my search partner at Perplexity the following question, quote, how many Americans claimed disabilities in 1980? How many claim disabilities today? Here is the answer. In 1980, 933,597 disability benefits were awarded. In 2024, over 70 million Americans reported having a disability. Did we get all that disabled over the course of the last 45 years? Were people really that much healthier in 1980? That we went from 1 million to 70 million reporting a disability in 2022? Really? I understand we're a little older of a country, but not 70 times older of a country. Okay, finally, AOC had some ideas about the evils of no tax on tips. This one is particularly rich. because she used to be a waitress. Listen to her argument for why there should, in fact, be a tax on tips.
Let's talk about a couple of these things. In terms of no tax on tips, obviously you all know, I was a waitress for many years. I was a bartender on many years. Someone said your sweater. Guys, I made it. Thank you. It's all, my hair's covering all the holes up here, so. But in terms of no tax on tips, listen, I was a waitress. I was a bartender. I get it. And if you live off of tips, I get it. I do think it's important for us to recognize the danger of every job becoming a tipped job. And all of us then now having to pay each other's wages, not just in waitressing, not just in bartending. And if you don't want every single person that you interact with starting to turn an iPad screen around, we need to take this very carefully. Because employers need to pay their employees a living wage. Employers need to pay their employees a living wage.
Okay, so let's talk about the myriad idiocies in this particular segment, because there are a bunch. Number one, she's admitting full scale that a bunch of people are going to start taking tips in order to avoid taxes. Why, it's almost as though economics is dynamic. And when you increase the tax rates on certain things and decrease them on other things, people do the things with less taxes. Remember, the entire democratic idea about economics is that it is a fixed pie. So if you tax people more, they won't change their behavior. You'll just get more money from them. And here she is acknowledging that if no tax on tips goes through, a bunch of people are going to start taking more of their pay in the form of tips in order to avoid taxes, almost as though tax rates impact economic activity. Strange. And then she adds another thing here. I love this. She says, the employers need to pay do you really want to be paying tips? Do you want to be paying tips to everyone? The employers should just pay a living wage. Now, this mistakes who actually pays the bills of the employers. The answer is the customers. So here are your choices as a customer. Either the employer pays a lower wage, say $7.50 an hour if you're talking about the federal minimum wage, and then you take a bunch of tips on top so you don't have to pay taxes on it. And then the customer is the one paying for those things in order to achieve the same result as if you had to pay a higher price in order to pay the taxes that the employer is going to have to pay on the wage. You understand? The customer has to pay for all of it. The employer don't got a source of money other than the customer. So no matter how you slice it, it's the customer paying. The only question is, if, for example, you get rid of the tax on tips, are the employees going to be taking more of their pay in the form of tips from the customer, or are they going to be taking their pay more in the form of a check from the employer? But the bottom line is probably going to be about the same. And if you force the employer to pay more, to increase the quote unquote living wage, that all gets passed on to the consumer anyway. So there you have it, the brilliance of Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez. Just stunning, stunning stuff. Well, folks, since we do have this new segment called Takedown, if you see any crazy monologues that you'd love to see me debunk, leave them in the comment section below. Well, folks, it's a Friday, and that means it's time to talk about stuff that I don't know about, namely cultural stories. Now, I'll talk about tariff policy. I talked earlier this week about whether the dollar will long remain the world's reserve currency. But the thing I don't know about is the stuff that literally millions of people actually care about and talk about, and that is these big pop culture stories. I've brought on an expert on that. That's our Daily Wire host, Reagan. Reagan, thanks so much for stopping by.
Thank you for having me. First of all, I just have to say that I've worked at this company at Daily Wire for 3 years. Before that, I was a fan of the show. So it is a full circle moment to be on here telling you about pop culture. There's a massive story going viral about an old mommy vlogger. And there's so many ethical implications that come from this story, which is why I wanted to talk to you and your audience about it, because it talks about exploiting children, but also the implications of what family vlogging can do to a family. And it's also important to point out the crazy juxtaposition that happened, because this woman was famous and viral for being this beloved mommy vlogger. She was so happy, so great, painted such a perfect life, until she got arrested for child abuse and has been convicted of child abuse and will remain in jail for 30 plus years. So the story got even wilder because the daughter now has come out and she's an advocate against family vlogging. So she speaks publicly about it all the time. And one of her quotes said, "There is no such thing as a moral or ethical family vlogger."
I mean, once you involve the kids in that, I kind of agree with it. Meaning that if you're kind of vlogging about you cooking at night or it's you and how you put the kids to bed or something, that's one thing. But once you start actually involving your kids in the making of this sort of stuff, then you're just a Hollywood mom. And I mean, I've known a lot of Hollywood moms because I used to live in Hollywood and I knew a lot of people who had kids in the industry. And that stuff is always borderline exploitative. There's a reason why Hollywood kids generally end up screwed up adults. And so it's not a real shock that when you take those means of production that used to require an entire studio system in order to make it happen, and then you just give it to everybody, there can be a lot of people who exploit their kids for the money. I mean, I think it's a pretty good take, actually. My wife has said, I've mentioned this on the show before, that she at some point wants to write a book titled "I'm a Terrible Mother and So Are You." Because that's actually the reality of being a parent, is that you realize that you fail literally all the time.
Yeah.
And so the sort of perfect parent that mommy vloggers very often are portraying, the only way you can achieve that is actually through just lying or through exploiting your kid. There's
Totally
almost no way
faking
to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Ruby is proof on that, unfortunately. So I want to show you some of these footage first before I get into this because it's crazy. And I just want you to react to this. So if we could roll the footage on this one.
Do you know where your name came from? Grandpa? Of course you know. Grandpa. So tell us who you're named after. Grandpa. Which grandpa? Okay, we're going to try this again. You be a little more talkative here. I am. I'm talking, answering your questions. Hey! If I hear one more word, get out! If I'm gonna let you, I don't vlog, and if I'm gonna spend all my time helping you, you're gonna help me too. I don't know what to do. Be excited to tell them where your name came from, even if you have to fake it. Fake being happy. Okay? I don't know if I can right now. I don't know why, it's just, okay, well, I'm gonna take a...
Well, that seems not great.
Just a clip. Again, there's a whole docuseries about this. But you see that she's just saying, do it regardless if you're happy, fake it.
I mean, it's Hollywood production very clearly, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing people miss about, this is true of reality TV. It's also obviously true of mommy blogging or whatever. There's a reason none of my kids, there are no pictures of them online. And we keep them completely away from the spotlight, specifically because of safety reasons, and we don't want their life to be dominated by it. But I mean, if you're making money off putting your kids on camera, then it is likely going to devolve into that, unfortunately. That looks pretty much like every Hollywood mom that I've ever met. It's pretty bad. So kind of like only for moms, right? They democratize the means of production. Speaking of which, apparently there are only updates that I have not yet heard.
Unfortunately, yes, there are many of those. The same kind of unethical and ways that you make money is exactly obviously what they're doing with OnlyFans and what women unfortunately are seeing too. So they're seeing role models like the Ruby Frankies of the world, and then they're seeing the role models like Bonnie Blue, who is the woman, I'll specify because there are multiple now, but the one woman is Bonnie Blue. She slept with 1,000 men in 24 hours. That's her claim to fame.
And I have so many questions about the logistics. I mean, just like who provided the buffet? Like, I don't know.
I know too much about the logistics, and I'm not going to share because it's...
Thank you, I appreciate that, actually. I wasn't that curious about it, yeah.
No, it's horrifying. But she has been flaunting a lot, like her money. Obviously, so she's making tons of money because of this, and a bunch of young girls are seeing that. Bonnie Blue, the infamous OnlyFans model, has recently made so much money that she has bought a $500,000 Ferrari, and she's posting about it all over social media. So I wanted to show you that because I think, again, there's more ethical and important questions to talk about regarding these women.
You ready to see your one-of-one custom 458 Liberty Walk?
I'm ready.
Fully customized and blue wrap, carbon everywhere, wide body kit.
Okay, so you just saw that, right? She's making tons of money, obviously. Someone commented something which I did want to share with you because, well, we all thought it was funny. She said, I wonder if she would let 1,000 random men take it for a spin or if it's too valuable to her to let that many people touch it. It's just brutal.
Yeah, that. I mean, that was, I will be honest, one of the first things that occurred to me about that car. But it is, you're right, a horrifying thing. Unfortunately, mainstreaming has been a thing for a very, very long time. I mean, I wrote a book back in 2005 that I was widely derided for called Generation, all about the of American society.
Yeah.
And I suggested that it would become absolutely endemic, that every young person in America would have seen by the time they were 13, 14 years old. And again, everyone mocked me at the time for saying that, but it became very clear that that's exactly what's happened here. And of course, young women are only seeing sort of the quote unquote upside and never the downside, which would be, the fact that she has no soul. That's going to drive a bunch of young women to do really, really stupid and terrible things to themselves. And if they think that the money is going to pay for all the damage they're doing to themselves, I have a hard time believing that.
The other thing that I wanted to point out though, specifically with Bonnie and why I wanted to show you anything about her, is that her mom is her manager.
That's so nice.
Isn't that so nice?
That's beautiful.
Watch this clip of her mom talking about her daughter's new profession.
What was it like after cleaning up after bang?
Messy. Hundreds of condoms, boxer shorts, tops, stained bed sheets, wet bed sheets.
So even when you hear, that she slept with 158 guys in 2 weeks.
It's just part of a job and that's it.
So you don't have any kind of, emotional response to it?
At first I did, but not anymore.
Yeah, well, I can see why Bonnie Blue turned out the way she did.
Yeah.
That's pretty obvious. And by the way, not a rarity. We now know that Kim Kardashian tape was pre-screened by her mother for particularly salacious cuts. So.
Yeah.
Good times.
Even in the duration of that, further on in that clip, the mom talks about, I get good holidays now. She was so proud to keep saying, the holidays are nice and she's safe. She's saying the quiet part out loud that, we have money now. And that justifies my daughter's soul. But the other thing that I want to note about these girls, unfortunately, is Lily Phillips announced just yesterday that she's going to old folks' home, specifically elderly care facilities, and meeting her men there, here's a video from that.
I found my oldest fan via Facebook, and when I asked for his address, he actually sent me the address of a care home. So I'm actually here with him and his friends, and I'm gonna show them a good time.
I think people are waking up because it's so absurd. They're finally realizing, hey, maybe we should have this conversation. Maybe these things are bad, which I'm absolutely very happy to say that there's also some more improvements in Hollywood. And I say it, I'm sort of celebrating crumbs here, but I'm going to show it nonetheless because, we got to take the wins when we get them. White Lotus, the show that I know you're familiar with, there's a new season out and a new episode in which a Trump supporter is talked about in a good light. So I want to show you the scene because, frankly, I've never seen a Trump supporter even really talked about in television, let alone not being exclusively made fun of. And yeah, watch this.
Yeah, there's Christianity and most religions, they're made for men, right? The father sacrifices the son's a man, dies on the cross, the heroes are all men, and the women just cry on the sidelines.
You want the woman to be centered in the story?
No. It's all just so male. The epic battle for good and evil just doesn't speak to me.
Well, I'm a woman, and I get a lot out of going to church. I love the people. It's very moving.
I didn't know you went to church.
Oh, yeah. We go every Sunday. Yeah, ever since we moved to Austin.
Is it like a real Texan church? With Bible thumpers and...
Well, the people are, more conservative than LA people or New York.
Is that weird for you?
Why would it be weird?
I don't know. If I was just around a bunch of Texans who voted for Trump, I guess I'd just feel a little alienated.
They're nice people. Really good families.
Cool. But do you ever talk politics with them?
Sometimes.
It doesn't get awkward?
Why would it?
Because. Wait. Are you a Republican?
No.
Okay.
I'm an independent. But Dave is.
An independent? Since when?
You didn't vote for Trump, though, did you?
Are we really going to talk about Trump tonight?
That's amazing. I mean, White Lotus actually is pretty subversive in this particular way. They take a bunch of liberal values and then they really mock the hell out of them. It doesn't make the show conservative. I mean, the first season is certainly not conservative, but they will definitely mock the living hell out of kind of the pretensions of limousine liberals. And that's really what the show's about. It's about limousine liberals from New York and LA who go on these extraordinarily expensive vacations and just act like horrific human beings, basically.
Yeah. I'm wondering, though, if in the future her character will end up being
And that makes sense, too.
the worst person. I'm giving Hollywood too much credit. Maybe. We'll see. But the other thing that I wanted to show you is from Disney's Pixar. They just released this show, and they talk about Christianity for a bit, which, again, never happens. And so I wanted to show you this as well.
First episode of the new Pixar Disney Plus series, Win or Lose, features a character called Lori, the daughter of the team's softball coach who struggles with insecurity. In one of her first scenes in the show, she begins with the words,
"Dear Heavenly Father, please give me strength."
This is the first Christian character from Disney since their 2007 film, Bridge to Terabithia, in which kids Jesse and Leslie attend church together and discuss religion.
I mean, the shocker there is that it took them 20 years, basically, to put another Christian in a kid's movie.
And so subtly. But I, as a Christian watching that, I didn't even realize that it had been 20 years. I watched Bridge to Terabithia and wouldn't have thought anything of it at the time. But thinking back that there literally hasn't been anything like that since is crazy to me.
Now, that show originally, I believe, was supposed to feature a transgender character, correct?
It was, exactly. But they removed that and added this in, which potentially is that a sign of the times changing that they're catching on to.
I mean, they better, because they have completely failed. I mean, Disney's stock has been just ravaged over the course of the last few years. Their growth trajectory is terrible because they alienated all the parents. Like, they forgot that the people they actually need to cater to are the people like me with 4 kids. We used to be Disney annual pass members in California. We used to go to Disneyland almost twice a month, maybe.
Yep.
We used to take the kids out of school and go. And I have not been back to Disney World now that we're in Florida for several years because of the move that they made into sort of wild social leftism.
Do you think there's any world in which they could change course and you'd go back?
Yeah, I mean, if they change course, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, forgiveness is I think, a virtue.
Yeah.
And so if they actually change course and you start to see more of a consistent stream of non-woke nonsense coming from Disney, then absolutely. I mean, I would love nothing better than to take my kids to Disneyland. It's great. Disneyland is wonderful. I mean, it's some of the greatest IP in history. It's going to take a while to earn back trust.
Yeah, more than just the crumbs of saying maybe one nice thing for people of faith to actually appreciate. But there was kind of, to end this segment about pop culture, and obviously some negativity with it and the chaos of OnlyFans and all that, there's a new study out about Christianity leveling off and no longer being on decline in America. And I think that that's a sign of potentially the changing times about the perspective of faith and the importance of having faith in a household again, which I found shocking. The headline was from New York Times, and it was a Pew Research study, and they said Christianity's decline in the U.S. appears to have halted, major study shows. That one shocked me because what they pointed out in the article was over the last 20 years, ironically the same time that we're talking about Bridge to Terabithia to this, but it was going down, and now it's stopped for a couple years. It's not going any lower. So maybe that's changing.
Well, and as they say, it's young white males who are going back to church.
Yep.
So I'll take a little credit for that one, guys.
I was going to say, yeah. Ben deserves some credit here. I mean, that's huge. And it's, again, young conservative males. Now, the other thing for Gen Z, to give us a little bit of credit, because we don't typically get a lot of credit, we're typically always the ones causing chaos. There's another article that I saw. It said Gen Z is more pro-marriage than millennials and have less casual sex, which is surprising.
That's a backlash. There we go.
Yeah, so
Finally,
we're redeeming ourselves
coming.
a little bit, except we still have the Bonnie Blues in our generation. But the study went on to say that in 2004, 78% of people commonly engaged in one-night stands. In 2024, 23% did. So a huge shift.
Well, hopefully that results in marriage and not just incelness. That would be the only complicating factor.
Also that. But I just thought it was at least something hopeful to end on, of maybe not everything is doom and gloom and the generations can kind of change course.
Well, Reagan Conrad, thank you so much for stopping by and informing me on all the things the world actually talks about most of the time. I really appreciate it. Great to see you.
You're more than welcome. Great to see you too.
Well, folks, it's time for you to go behind the paywall and explore the rest of the news with me. But in order to do that, you actually have to be a member here at Daily Wire. We have so much great stuff behind the paywall. So, Reagan, what is your favorite thing that we have behind the paywall?
Now, I know a lot because, again, I work here and have for 3 years. But I would say my favorite is still What is a Woman? That is the absolute, if you haven't watched it, you are missing out.
I'm a little bit hurt and insulted, but if you're not a member, become a member, use code Shapiro, check out for 2 months free on all annual plans. Click that link in the description and join us.